Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Blair Best. Welcome to The Story. The funding crisis for the Oregon Department of Transportation will be a top priority when the legislature convenes next month. The agency needed a bailout last winter just to keep snowplows running. But at the same time, ODOT is pushing ahead on several big and expensive projects around Portland, some of which have their own funding problems. And one of them just got much worse. And that is our big story tonight. The Abernethy Bridge carries I-205 over the Willamette River between Oregon City and West Lynn. ODOT is 2.5 years into construction on a project to widen it and make it strong enough to survive a major earthquake. But agency officials announced this month that the project is $72 million over budget, and the completion date has slipped from late 2025 to fall of 2026. This is not the project's first overrun. In fact, it's not even the first time this year. ODOT already asked for another $85 million back in May. The project's cost now stands at $815 million, almost $300 million more than when it went out to bid just 3 years ago. And if that sounds bad, this latest increase might not be the end of it.
That total cost does not include pricing of those risks Mr. Finn mentioned that we have on the risk register. There are additional costs that may be coming in. And so we can't say conclusively that $815 million is the final total cost for Abernethy. It is the cost as of today.
All right, let's back up a second and look at why the project is so short on cash. ODOT has pointed to some familiar causes: inflation, contractor disputes, unexpected engineering challenges. But there's another big factor here: tolls. They were supposed to help pay for this project. So when Governor Tina Kotek slammed the brakes on regional tolling, it had all kinds of impacts down the road, so to speak. And unlike many other ODOT mega projects that hope to use toll funds, the Abernethy Bridge construction was already underway, putting ODOT in a tough spot, as they explained back in June.
Right now, we have a project that is under active construction with the I-205 Abernethy Bridge project that is spending millions of dollars a month. And for almost exactly to the day 3 months, we have not had a funding source for that. As the guy who's in charge of keeping the agency in the black, that makes me extremely nervous.
All right, at first they plugged hole by moving over funding from another mega project, the Rose Quarter expansion in Portland. But then the Rose Quarter needed that money back to apply for a federal grant, which was ultimately denied. But this time the money stayed with the Rose Quarter, leaving Abernethy back at square one. So ODOT's new approach is to take funding from a bunch of smaller projects. Here's how that's going to work. The Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, is Oregon's main fund for transportation capital projects. Think of it as the fund for medium-sized transportation things like repainting a large bridge or replacing a small one. Abernethy is technically eligible for STIP dollars, but the fund is not typically used for mega projects. ODOT says if they took all the money they needed for Abernethy from the current STIP budget, there would almost be nothing left. And that would mean that nearly every other bridge repair project in the books for the next 3 years statewide would have to be canceled or delayed. And that was before Abernethy ran another $72 million over budget. So this month, instead of doing that, the Oregon Transportation Commission decided to issue bonds to cover Abernethy's cost right now and then pay them back from the STIP fund more gradually over the next 25 years. But while the pain will be more spread out, we're still going to feel it, because the more bonds you take out now, the more funding you have to devote to debt payments in future STIP cycles, and the less you have available for other projects.
Normally, we might be able to fund 2/3 of them. We'll simply cut the list a little bit shorter. So it'll be basically the debt service would be a line in the program budget, and there will be less money available for delivering other projects.
Now, at a meeting earlier this month, ODOT officials said the current 3-year STIP budget devotes about $45 million to debt payments. In the next cycle, that's going to jump to $105 million, more than a third of the STIP's total bridge funding. The bonds have to be authorized by the legislature, so state lawmakers will get their own chance to weigh in on this plan. But if they don't like it, they would have to find some other source of funding, which is already a massive ask for ODOT as an entire agency, let alone for one project. Just one more transportation budget puzzle for lawmakers to dig into next month. And while we are talking about the legislature, tomorrow is the special session called by Governor Kotek to figure out wildfire funding. And that's because the cost to fight wildfires in Oregon this past summer was so high, Oregon Department of Forestry basically ran out of money. Now, as Pat Doris reports, the state is moving more than $200 million from the general fund into various accounts just to pay for it.
Oregon's 2024 wildfire season saw roughly 2 million acres burned. At one point, there were 10,000 firefighters in the state. Now, the bills are adding up, and the Oregon Department of Forestry does not have enough to pay everyone. The amount's big enough that the Oregon legislature must come together to pass a law allowing the money to flow from the state's general fund. The Oregon Department of Forestry is expected to get about $192 million. That will reimburse the agency for money it's already paid out to crews and also give it money to pay bills it still owes. The state's fire marshal's office will get roughly $26 million for its wildfire-related costs. Nick Tyler, the chief for Sweet Home Fire, told the Senate committee preparing the funding bill the money is badly needed and the fires widespread.
When I first started responding to large-scale conflagration fires, one theme was consistent. We went to Eastern Oregon. Slowly, we started responding to Southern Oregon, and then we saw an increase in large fires in Western Oregon.
Looking from the left to the right on this graphic, you see that 2024 had the most acres burned by far in the last 30 years, and it's the most in Oregon's recorded history. It's such a big issue that a separate group is studying the question of how to pay for the huge fire seasons moving forward.
So it's a huge challenge, and what the group identified was that there is not going to be one single source that solves this problem. It's going to need a comprehensive solution set with probably a little bit from many sources that build towards that greater solution.
Their graphic shows they believe it will take a combination of new sources, money from the general fund, payments from landowners, and some sort of statewide tax or fee that will help pay for wildfires. This group is not involved in the special session and will instead make their final proposals to lawmakers during the regular session in January.
What we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to pay our bills. Wildfire is incredibly important in this state. It's getting more and more important, and I look forward to the recommendations that are going to come.
Pat Doris, KGW News.
All right, let's go inside the St. Helens Middle School cafeteria. Here's a live look at the school board meeting that started there just minutes ago. You can hear them talking now. If you've been following our show the past several of weeks, you'll remember the St. Helens School District is having major issues when it comes to keeping their students safe. Just a couple of hours ago, we learned a communications consultant hired to help the district as it deals with an ongoing sex abuse scandal has resigned after the district found out he had a previous felony conviction for embezzlement. Education officials admitted there was no background check because he didn't work directly with children. Now, this scandal has been ongoing in St. Helens for weeks. A current and former teacher have been arrested on allegations of sexually abusing a total of 9 students. The high school principal also faces charges for allegedly not forwarding reports of sexual abuse. All 3 of them pleaded not guilty. The governor got involved and put pressure on the district, which led to the board voting in an acting superintendent about 2 weeks ago. Now, all of this has understandably sparked major community outrage. Parents tell KGW they're extremely angry. Some even pulled their students out of the school. Now, Catherine Cook is at the meeting and will bring us the latest tonight at 11. And Friday morning, the district will answer people's questions about the ongoing scandal in an effort to be transparent. Now we wanted to correct part of a segment that the team aired last night here on The Story. It was the big story about the DEQ emissions testing and whether or not the program is still needed here in Oregon, since our neighbors to the north in Washington killed the program there back in 2020. Now, we shared some data on greenhouse gas emissions in both states, citing levels of carbon dioxide, or CO2, released into the atmosphere, tying that to emissions testing. But as many of our viewers pointed out to us following the show, that was wrong. The DEQ emissions test does not measure the amount of CO2 released into the air. Instead, the testing is used to measure air pollutants like hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide, which is CO, not CO2. So that portion of the segment was incorrect, and we apologize for the error. We also said last night that we would share your comments on whether or not the program should stick around here in Oregon. But because our segment mischaracterized outcomes, we've decided to hold off on airing your emails and voicemails. But there are still efforts to reduce carbon emissions as part of the state's greenhouse gas goals. In a few weeks, a new rule will go into place aimed at reducing the number of trucks on the road that use gas or diesel. The Advanced Clean Truck Rule was first introduced in California. It mandates that manufacturers increase the percentage of zero-emission trucks they sell. Oregon is following California's lead, along with 11 other states. Our state's rules start in 2025, so in a little over 2 weeks. Now, the percentage of zero-emission vehicles they're required to sell is set to increase over the next decade. The exact percentage varies by type of truck. Next year, it's 7% for things like a tractor truck, to 11% for rigid trucks like box trucks. As you can see here, it goes up over time until 2035, when 75% of the rigid trucks on the road are expected to be zero emission, 55% of pickups, and 40% of tractor trucks. Now, at least one Oregon lawmaker is hoping that plan will be delayed. Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis is a Republican representing the Albany area. She comes from a trucking family, and she herself owns and operates a 35-truck operation. She says right now, Oregon does not have the infrastructure in place to support electric trucks, and in some cases, the vehicles themselves simply don't exist.
The heavy duty pickup, think of your F-250 or F-350, there are no plug-in electric vehicle options. So there's that, right? So they just are not available. Then you look at your RVs, because the RV world is actually kind of poking their head up, looking around and saying, why does this apply to us? There aren't electric options. And if there were, they'd be very expensive, and the infrastructure just isn't there to plug them in. So this also includes RVs. And then you also look at your over-the-road heavy-duty truck. The gross vehicle rating, the gross vehicle weight rating isn't there. You can only haul up to 80,000 pounds with that, even though here in Oregon we can haul up to 105.5. So it doesn't work in that application. And also, if you were to drive through Oregon on I-5 from Washington to, say, California, there is no place other than one place in Portland that has a commercial supercharger in order to even plug in your heavy-duty over-the-road truck.
Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality says manufacturers will have some flexibility in what they sell while the market develops new EVs. So if they don't have big EV trucks or RVs to sell, they can meet those percentages by selling things like electric school buses instead. In fact, just today, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced $6 million in grant funding to help the state buy 26 zero-emission school buses. This is video right here of new electric school buses in Beaverton, funded last year by the EPA. The money will also go toward creating chargers for the buses. And Oregon DEQ says the state is also investing in bringing new public chargers online for big commercial vehicles along the I-5 corridor. They're planning to break ground on one in the Salem area next year. They told us, quote, "We recently received $102 million in funds along with California and Washington under the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant to install electric charging stations and hydrogen stations along I-5. Oregon is receiving $21 million to install 2 publicly accessible MHD charging stations and 1 hydrogen station. Representative Bosshart Davis says she'd rather see some middle ground here. Things like incentives for people to buy newer trucks that still run on gas but with fewer emissions than older trucks. But she does believe zero-emission trucks can work for some industries.
In some applications, I think this works. In some applications, like garbage trucks, delivery vans, those that stop every night and where this equipment is actually available, those applications can work. Let's encourage those businesses and encourage those applications to go ahead and upgrade if they want to. And I would suggest if the market wanted these types of vehicles, then we wouldn't need these mandates in order to push them to buy them, that they would be readily available.
DEQ says they expect most of the vehicles affected by the incoming rules to actually fall under a category like that, traveling 100 miles or less per day and charging at a private location instead of a public charger. DEQ is also taking public comment on new regulations to reduce diesel emissions, and they recently had a listening session on exactly that. We'll explore that tomorrow night right here on The Story. Well, still ahead on The Story, we're heading across the Columbia to Vancouver, where data shows homelessness is increasing, but fewer people are actually sleeping on the streets. How that math works out when The Story returns. We talk about homelessness a lot here in the city of Portland, but we're getting new details tonight on the crisis in Vancouver, Washington. According to an end-of-the-year report, 522 people are homeless in Vancouver. That's more than a third of the homeless population in all of Clark County, which is more than 1,300. Vancouver city officials say more people are experiencing homelessness indoors than ever before. That means more people are staying in places like city-run tiny home villages. The latest count for Clark County shows homelessness increased this year by 5%, but unsheltered homelessness dropped a tiny bit by 0.4% compared to last year. A small step in the right direction. All right, Devin Haskins joins us from Vancouver tonight. He's been following this for us today. Devin, who did you talk to, and what are some of the root causes of homelessness there? And is anything being done to address those bigger picture issues?
Well, Blair, I talked with the City of Vancouver's homeless response manager, and she says why we're seeing a large increase of families experiencing homelessness is because of the large eviction rate here in Clark County. She says it's the highest in the state and says it'll take time to fix. But in the meantime, they are opening up some winter shelters, 5 of them, in fact. 3 of them will be severe winter shelters. 2 of them will be overnight shelters. That'll be open through March. They're also in the process of building a 150-bed shelter they hope to have open by 2026.
Those are much needed services. That reminds me, just about a week ago, I was talking with a homeless woman from Vancouver who's now in a shelter here in Oregon because there wasn't a bed for her in Vancouver. We'll keep following this. Thank you, Devin. All right, to an update in the now blocked merger between grocery giants Kroger and Albertsons after federal and state judges ruled against what would have been the largest grocery merger in U.S. history. Albertsons pulled out of the deal and filed a lawsuit against Kroger. Yesterday, a federal judge in Portland issued a preliminary injunction meant to pause the merger until an in-house judge at the Federal Trade Commission could weigh in. Hours later in Washington, a state judge in Seattle issued a permanent injunction barring the merger in that state. Now, according to the Associated Press, Albertsons, who owns Safeway stores, accuses Kroger of failing to take, quote, any and all actions to secure approval for the deal. They're asking Kroger to pay a $600 million termination fee with billions in legal fees and lost shareholder value. Kroger, which owns Fred Meyer and QFC stores, calls the claims baseless and says Albertsons is not entitled to the fees. Albertsons' decision to pull out of the deal shocked some industry experts since it took away the possibility of the companies working together to appeal the Washington ruling or persuade the FTC hearings. When we come back, what are those mysterious lights in the sky above Oregon?
You are cleared to maneuver as necessary, left and right, to avoid the UFO out there.
What commercial pilots say they saw and the possible explanation when the story returns. So this past weekend, several commercial pilots reported mysterious lights zipping through the skies above Oregon, prompting questions about UFOs. At least 4 commercial pilots reported the lights in the sky. On Sunday night, a United Airlines pilot radioed air traffic control after spotting them in the Eugene area. A Life Flight pilot reported one of the lights was going in circles in a corkscrew-like pattern and showed up on his aircraft's collision avoidance system.
Red in color. Moving at extreme speeds. I don't even know how to describe how fast he's moving.
You are cleared to maneuver as necessary, left and right, to avoid the UFO out there.
Okay, so what were the unidentified flying objects? Dr. Douglas Bittner led a study examining a similar case involving pilots who spotted moving objects over the Pacific Ocean in 2022. Now, he says they were flares from SpaceX's Starlink satellites. He believes the same thing happened this weekend, although he has not ruled out other possibilities. Now, this isn't the first time a UFO has been seen here in Oregon. The team went searching in our archives today for any previous coverage of UFOs and found incredible reports from 65 years ago. September 1959. The story was hosted by veteran broadcaster Hal Starr, who had a weekly series about UFOs on radio and then later on television. Shortly before dawn in Redmond, Oregon, police officer Robert Dickerson saw a large, bright object descend over the city, stop abruptly, and hover at 200 feet.
Now, when you and Mr. Wirtz looked at the object, how it had moved from where you first saw it?
Yes, it had moved in this direction, east, towards Prineville over Powell Buttes.
And how did it appear then?
When it moved, the bright light went out, the intensity of the light, and seemed to have just a faint red glow. And then it went right straight over in this direction, right over Powell Buttes, which sets off in the east here.
And, do you think it could have possibly been a weather balloon?
No, I don't.
What about Venus?
No, not Venus.
Do you have any idea what it could have been?
No, I don't.
Well, Dickerson took what he saw to the FAA, who relayed it to Seattle Air Route Control Center, who then reported it to the military.
And you reported this to your headquarters at Seattle?
I reported to the Traffic Control Center at Seattle.
Now, we understand that Portland Air Base scrambled at least one jet aircraft. Is that right?
Well, I don't know for sure just what they did to it. I know it was reported to them, and there was interceptors in the area, but I don't know just where they came from or where they were dispatched from.
And did they ever see anything?
No, I talked to one of them, and nothing was ever sighted. He had called me by radio to get a description of the object and the last known position.
For how long did you watch this object altogether?
Well, it was approximately about 40 minutes. I watched it in the northeast quadrant before the interceptors came, and when they were to the southeast of it, why the thing began to rise and went up through the clouds at about 14,000 feet. Kind of lit up the clouds as it went through.
It lit up the clouds as it went through.
6 F-102 jets were scrambled to intercept the supposed UFO. Now, at the time, the Air Force would not confirm whether or not it was legitimately a UFO sighting. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks for watching. For those of you watching live tonight, the good stuff is coming your way next. And for the rest of you watching online, don't forget you can stream the story on your own schedule. Just download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. In the meantime, enjoy your Wednesday night, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.